Hi, everyone, and welcome to Vital Wisdom with me, Dr. Eli Camp. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Paul Theriault, from Canada, from the far north. And we have a topic today that I hope is going to be helpful to all of you, especially those who have written in with questions about it. Before we get going on that, Dr. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you practice and what your practice is about and all that great stuff.
So I practice in Calgary, Alberta. It's very funny. I'm a vitalist, and vitalism plays out again in every sociocultural situation if you apply it properly. Many vitalists practice in rural areas and kind of frontier medicine. I practice in the middle of a densely populated urban center of 2 million. So I have a very interesting practice that way, but I do a lot of homeopathy. I like to say I'm married to homeopathy, but it's an open marriage. I do a lot of botanical medicine, a lot of osteopathic manipulation that I'm training in. I'm doing a lot of like acupuncture and all sorts, and I do a lot of everything. So, but married to homeopathy.
And you went to the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine?
Yes, now it is CCNM East, but it formerly was just CCNM because CCNM bought out the other naturopathic school in Vancouver. So now I went to CCNM East and I graduated in 2010. I've been in practice for about 15 years now.
Okay, all right. And you also, didn't you teach at CCNM? What? No, I
No.
thought you did. No, okay, all right. So I so the topic today is this idea of sexual identity. That's what we're going to talk about in kids. And I had a number of folks write in, and many young parents, caregivers of young children, wanting to talk about how do we know when children are just being curious or when they truly have whether it's genetic or hormonal or biochemical or even just the psyche of the opposite sex that they were physically born into. Plus, we also have folks who are born with mixed genetics and mixed genitalia who aren't really sure, which path. And so, and there's this upsurgence of surgical procedures and hormonal therapy happening with very young children right now. And so I thought we should just do an episode on this and see what wisdom and knowledge we can offer to folks out there. So I'm going to let you start because I know you have a lot to say on this topic.
I'm a very opinionated Canadian, so I have a lot to say on many topics. But let's start. Let's get our terminology gay. So we need to be very clear on what we're talking about here. So there is sex. There is human beings do have certain configurations that have to do with reproduction. It's not, there are two big clusters of sex. There's male that we call and female. In humans, these are associated with chromosomal differences, but male and female make up about 99-ish% of the human species. But there are actually 6 chromosomal variants that are very stable. So men, like male, looking for the right word. Men typically have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. Women have 2 X chromosomes. There can also be, as I said, there are 6 stable variants of chromosomal, 6 stable chromosomal variants that lead to a healthy or a reasonably healthy human lifestyle. They are X. People can just have 1 X chromosome. There can be XXY. There can be XYY. Both of those are actually, it's hard to tell that people have that. There may be some slight signs and symptoms physically, but those people are not particularly differentiated. And then there's XXXY. So there are 6 chromosomal genders, 2 of which are extremely predominant, XX and XY. We can, however, get, so there are a number of conditions in which people can have chromosomes that doesn't match their physical sex. So if you've got a specific gene mutation on the Y chromosome, the hormones won't work properly and you will be phenotypically female. So this is the reason why back ages ago, they used to do like karyotypes. So they take little blood samples from students and they look at their own chromosomes. They don't do that no more because about every year or two in a class, if you got a class of 100 high school students, you'd find someone that like, oh, I have a male chromosomal pattern, but I'm a woman. And it's a really big deal. So that is sex. It is, we can refer to there being two really big clusters, but there's a lot of variability in that, including people who, for various reasons, kind of are intersex. They have they kind of go halfway between just because of what happened during development and so forth. Then there's gender. Gender is the sociocultural construction of sex. Men do this, women do that, how that interacts with culture. There's a lot of overlap with biology in that, but the overlap is not perfect. And gender is very, very variable cross-culturally. And there's even within a single culture, there's a great deal of flexibility that can occur most of the time. So for instance, in shall we say, Anglophone cultures, we've had two genders for a really long time. This is not universally true. So for instance, you and I were discussing earlier, if you look at the Cherokee language, there are 4 genders that are given. I'm more familiar with the Dene terminology. In the Dene terminology, there are 5. So there's man, woman, man in a woman's body, that's the translation, woman in a man's body, and then true neutral, which we usually translate today as two-spirited. So usually people that are kind of, so, and then the third thing to identify is sexual identity. So sexual identity in kind of Anglophone culture, so Anglophone is a Canadian word, it means English speaking. It usually involves to who you're attracted to. And our culture elaborates that out into identity quite a bit. But, you're attracted to who you're attracted to. So, some people are attracted to everyone. Some people are attracted to nobody. Some people like guys and some people like girls and so forth. So you can see you've got all these little variables that go around here. And again, in women, it's about 20% of women that experience attraction to other women at some point, if you include full lesbians and bisexuals. In men, it's about 10%. So, and then, yeah. So there is a lot of variability that can occur there. And in addition to that, there is more than biology, more than culture, there's something of the spirit to gender. Gender is not just biology, it's not just culture. There is some innate disposition people have to one of these roles. It's like so I was raised hippie in a very Americanized part of Canada where everyone's quite Christian. So it was very odd. So, and I can remember past lives, and I can remember being a straight man once in like 70 or 80 past lives. All the rest of them, I was a straight woman, and here I am in a gay boy body and everything. And so I still kind of think of myself that way. It's like, oh, I'm a straight woman, or like something like even without thinking about it, I just identify with that and everything. No, I'm perfect. I have no intention of like transitioning or doing anything like that. And just because of my worldview and my religious beliefs, I'm like, okay, if I want to be a straight woman again, I got another, I can do that next time. But right now I'm a gay boy, and that's kind of fun. And it's quite enjoyable.
Right.
So there is something of the spirit to it as well. And and physical don't always match. So there are individuals where, I suppose like myself, they feel there's a disjoint there. Sometimes they're okay with that. Sometimes they want to make a shift on that. This phenomenon is historically very common. It's in every culture that allows people to do this. Again, it's about that 1% that will choose this. It is known in relatively small scale cultures, like the Dene, particularly. We know this because most of the Dene and Athabascan languages have these multiple, like these not multiple, but like 3, 4, 5 genders, and they all split off from each other linguistically about between 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, they were relatively small societies where you'd meet like 500, 600 people throughout your life. but there was enough of this that they would recognize, okay, you're a man and woman's body, hooray. So this does occur when you don't suppress it. So our Anglophone cultures are going through a period where it's not suppressed anymore. The anthropological term is salience. So this is an you can pick up now. It's part of the culture, like being gay is now. So, and an interesting thing is, as it's become salient, as it's become an option, we've noticed an increase in it. This happened, the exact same thing happened with left-handedness. In like the 70s or 80s, they stopped punishing people for being left-handed. And it went from being about 3% of the population to about 11%. And then everyone's like, oh my God, everyone's left-handed. We need to punish them. Everyone's going to be left-handed. And then it stabilized at 11%.
Right. Right. Which is a natural occurrence.
Yeah, that's the natural. You stop punishing people and all of a sudden it comes out a little bit more. You start the same thing happened with homosexuality like 20 years ago. It's like, oh my God, everyone's gay. No, not everyone's gay. It's about 5 to 10% of the male population experiences some level of same-sex attraction. So if you leave people alone and you don't make it a big deal, it stabilizes right around there. So that's the situation where we are at right now. And now that we are in this period where there's not really a good cultural model, particularly in Anglophone parents, where people are English speaking, that is a new thing, and we are all struggling to deal with it. So that's kind of where we are right now. This is a natural phenomenon. I know not every culture accepts that. And that's kind of the tricky part right here, is that there are cultural ideals around sex and gender that think anything outside of their ideas is pathological and wrong.
Right.
And the natural world just does not support this. These things happen.
Right. Well, sure. We see it in animal populations, non-human animal populations. We see it as an adaptation when an area becomes overpopulated and resources start to dwindle. You start to see less reproduction happening, and it's not necessarily because the females and males can no longer viably reproduce. They have less interest in the opposite, right? In the opposite sex that could allow them to reproduce. And you see it, like you said, I love that you brought the spirit and the psyche into it as well. So I think that's going to be really helpful for people to sort of understand the spectrum. It's not, straight or gay. It's not male or female. And we know as physicians that folks can be born with both genitalia, and somehow medicine thought, the medical practitioners thought it would be a great idea to make them choose at a very young age, to make the parents choose at a very young age what that child was going to be labeled as, right? Which is a shame that happened. And I don't know if it's happening less today or just as it always had happened, which was, they had that conversation and wanted to put them in surgery right away. And
yeah, no, those cases typically have very bad outcomes.
Exactly. Yes. So, okay, so let's talk. I know we have a lot to talk about, but let's talk about the parents and caregivers of young children who are pre-puberty and in an exploratory stage, because I think this is an area where parents are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to satisfy what they perceive their children desire or are trying to develop into, and they're walking into these surgical and hormone therapy avenues pre-puberty.
So we need to go in Western culture. So forgive me, I just had to move. My brother came in to me with some renovation stuff. So
that's okay. That's all right.
But so in our culture right now, the idea of this has gone on, and the interaction of the gender binary, which is what it's called, the Western kind of model, male, female, and nothing else,
Right.
combined with contemporary allopathic medicine, and combined with the natural existence of these individuals, has created a really weird situation.
Yes.
So the difference between, shall we say, the modern trans movement, modern gender ideas, and someone who is male in a female body in the Dene in northern Alberta is quite extreme. Our culture has this such gender essentialism that we are now kind of forcing people to present as one gender or another, as opposed to presenting as themselves, male in a woman body, women in a male body, etc. And there's a lot of surgical and hormonal manipulation that's going on with that. Not that that's not helpful for some people. Some people, surgeries and hormones and everything else are quite life-saving, and they're really wonderful for them. But that is an interesting novel development that is very historically new. So that's different than what we used to do. Not completely. In India, there's a very long surgical tradition, and there was surgery done in certain hijras there, and so they've got a very long idea of what to do and everything else like that. But in most cultures, surgery and hormonal therapies are very novel. So this is kind of where we are going right now, and this is interacted particularly with children in a very weird way. So we need to kind of break that down a little bit.
Mhm.
So very natural for children to kind of, as part of their developmental process, to play and to imitate and to want to be part of the opposite sex and everything else like that, without actually having any gender incongruence is kind of the current term, without actually having any of that. It happens. Almost every kid, like almost every little girl, wants to be, play in stereotypical male roles, and almost every little boy wants to play in stereotypical little boy roles. This is perfectly normal and happy. But in our culture, where there's increased awareness, that can often be magnified into a thing that's bigger than it is. So, yeah. Thank you, Joe.
And magnified into a problem when no problem actually exists.
Yeah. So,
I mean, you can pretend to be Cinderella. You can pretend to be a wizard from Harry Potter. There's no difference.
Yeah. So this is that kind of is getting blown out of the water, or getting blown out of proportion a little bit. And there are some places that have very unethical standards of practice that have done that. The one that I'm really aware of is the Tavistock Clinic in the UK. That is not nearly as big of a problem as kind of the alternative media have portrayed it as. It is really a problem limited to several institutions and a couple of pretty sloppy practitioners. But like in Alberta,
well, what is it? What do they do? What is it?
In many of those cases, they would socially transition children. So they would, bring them like, okay, you want to be a girl all the time, be a girl all the time, and there would be the additional hormonal therapies and various things, and sometimes surgical interventions at a very young age.
Okay, pre-puberty.
Yes, this has been massively blown out of proportion by the alternative media, to the extent that the Alberta government banned the procedures and like using hormonal blockers and all that, and hormonal therapies for people under 18 and everything, and surgical therapies, and they weren't actually happening. Like the conventional standards of care stipulated, okay, this is how we do this. We start this at 18 and everything. And so it had already, like, the allopathic guidelines, and how difficult it is for me to get to defend allopathic standards of care, Eli. But like they were actually quite good in Alberta even before the legislation. So it was like legislation that was made up for a problem that didn't exist.
Right.
So it was just like, yeah.
What a waste. Right.
So kind of a situation that people are coming in now. And so now it's kind of getting to the point where a lot of states are banning various therapies for everything, which is having some very complicated and unforeseen events. So it's kind of a thing. And the state does have a role in the regulation of medical practice. It does. Sometimes medical professions can't regulate themselves. Sometimes, and the state needs to institute regulation. But when the state starts picking which therapies need to get used by what, you're getting into some pretty difficult territory right there.
Well, you know how I stand on that. I think people should have full autonomy for their medical practices and therapies.
I do not think full autonomy. There are certain instances in which the state needs to regulate it. One of the big ones is conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is a therapy where you have a guy who's same-sex attracted. You show him a hot guy, and then you present noxious stimuli and everything.
I
That's
see.
ordinarily dangerous, and it actually increases the suicide rate quite a bit. And so the professional colleges in Alberta banned it. It was happening by unregulated practitioners, so people outside of that, and so the government did just ban it outright, and I think that's justified.
Is that a person would go to a practitioner and say they want this, or they were doing this to children?
Both.
Oh,
Yeah, no. So a
oh,
parent would see their kid displaying same-sex attraction. This happens. Sometimes kids just like it's pretty obvious and there it manifests quite early. Like this is, and again, that's not pathological, but there are times when this would happen, particularly under the guise of some religious institutions.
right,
So
right.
on that, I am fully aware of how difficult and how slippery a slope we're on, but I'm like, yeah, that ban is justified. So
Yeah.
yeah. So
Well,
I'm
I would
in a
agree with you. I would agree
very
with you.
yeah.
So, could someone over the age of 18 have that done if they wanted to do it? Like if they said, I want to do this?
At this point, no.
No.
That was the tricky part, isn't it? See, we're on, if they wanted to, could they, I wouldn't have a problem with that. The legislation says no, and there are some pretty severe outcomes that can occur. Like
Right.
even person is fully consenting and everything, like it's really bad. It's a really nasty therapy, in terms of long-term things. So yeah. So
So, Mary and Bob, let's
yeah.
take Mary and Bob, who wrote in and said they have a 7-year-old son, and he's got a 9-year-old sister.
Mhm.
And he wants to wear her dresses and her skirts, and he wants to paint his nails. And they are they are uh, incredibly disturbed.
Mm.
Like they're freaking out.
Mm.
And they saw a couple of practitioners. They saw a psychologist. They talked to their family doctor. The family doctor referred them to a clinic where they could start hormone therapy. Uh, the psychologist had the most level head about it, and they wrote into me, right, and said, "Could you please talk about this?" Um, he said they're play acting, they're imagining, they're exploring, and their hormones have not even come in yet.
Mhm.
What do you think about? What would you tell Mary and Bob?
And tell Mary and Bob, what's the problem? Your kid
Right?
wants to wear a dress and paint his nails. Go ahead. Like, man,
He's
do the
7.
little boy a glamazon for a couple of days. Like, that's I don't see the problem here. So you can do this and maybe he's happy. Maybe he's like, oh, okay, this is a fun experience. Maybe it's like, my nephew likes wearing werewolf costumes. Same thing. He's not gonna, become a werewolf. But if that's the case, maybe there's something more to it. You can
Right,
cross that when you come to it.
right, right.
So cross the bridge when you come to it and everything. So one of the things that I do suggest to most parents is to be very frank with their kids about this. Have a talk with them at some point, maybe when they're 6, 7, 8, when they start asking questions about relationships and that kind of thing. Have a frank talk with them about this. Like, okay, some people are men, but they're born in women's bodies. Some people are women, but they're born in men's bodies. They can live that way if they want to. They don't have to. Some people just like, and tell them sometimes people enjoy, like, oh, what would this be like? They like to play act a little bit. Explain that to kids, and they have a license to do it. Some people are attracted to guys, and some people are attracted to girls. I keep it on an appropriate level.
Of course, of course.
And when puberty happens, you can elaborate that a little bit. One of the things that a lot of parents are actually having me do right now, and it's very odd. A lot of my practice now is talking to straight women about birth control and sex and
Oh,
STI.
wow. I wonder how you ended up there.
I don't know. I don't know. It just happened. And so a lot of these women are now bringing me their kids in for me to have a talk about birth control and sex because I'm quite frank about it and everything. And maybe it just sinks in if it's not someone that's their parents and everything. I get that. But I encourage parents to be frank with their kids at an age appropriate level about these things. Like, these are real. You tell kids about this, or you tell kids and teenagers about this, they're like, oh, okay, this is a thing. Okay. You make it salient for them.
Right.
And yeah, so that's a very important part of that. There is a lot of delegating of those kind of talks to other things. And it's okay if you're like, hey, Paul, can you have this talk with my kid about STIs? And I can do that. I
Yeah.
know a lot about STIs, but I know that's very important. So,
Yes.
and another thing is just like play acting is a thing. Like the kid wants to do it for a couple of days, let them. I
Yeah.
mean, there is a view of parents in certain religious groups of having to enforce gender roles. And you do not have to enforce anything that is innate to the being. Gender role is something that, or gender is something innate to yourself that you have to, that expresses out and grows. You do not have to enforce it. You have to enforce kids like don't hit your sister and things like that. You have to do things like that. You have to teach kids how to care for themselves. You have to teach them how to manage a fever in themselves and how to treat things when they're sick and everything. Teach your kids hydro, teach them basic first aid, teach them how to cook and that kind of thing. You don't have to teach gender. Gender is inherent.
Right.
You might have to teach them some of the pitfalls of your gender, like, guys, you really do need to, guys really need to be taught to kind of lay off, like, give people some space and everything else that way. Testosterone's it's an intense substance. You gotta, give people some
Right.
space because
Right.
it can be a little pushy. Women, same thing, with hormonal cycles and everything. You need to teach them to manage that, but it's not a parent's place to enforce gender on a child.
No. No, I agree with you.
You got to help them do the innate gender that they are. One of the best quotations from the Organon of Medicine, just kind of the Bible of homeopathy, is that the physician must know what is in disease to be cured.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes.
What actually needs to be cured here?
In that situation, I don't think there's anything wrong.
No, that doesn't need to be cured. What needs to be cured is ailments from that. So, right, I have a 20-year-old man sitting in my office, and uh, he is a female in a male body. He's attracted to men and
Mm,
has been his whole life, even pre-puberty.
mm,
And he comes in and he wants a remedy to make
mm,
him, he said, I need a remedy to make me not gay. And I said, okay, well, let's have a talk about this because is it, do you see gay as being the thing that needs to be fixed or how
mm,
you feel about it and how it affects your life and symptoms that arise because you feel like you're not in balance? Maybe you're in balance and the fact that you feel you're not in balance is causing you to be out of balance. And I worked with him for quite a while until one day he came in, he said, okay, well, I I I I don't think I'm sick. And I said, I don't think you're sick either. Like, I'm here for as long as you need me, but I really don't think there's anything to fix
mm.
anymore, right? He had to accept himself as he was and stop caring so much about what society thought of him.
Yeah.
That was the problem. And you know what remedy I gave him, right? Very, very, very concerned with the opinions of others, right? Lots of GI disturbance. And
Mm,
a very basic remedy that helped clear up not only the physical stuff, but the way he thought about himself.
yeah. So
Restored
there,
his confidence in him.
well, and that's kind of the trick, isn't it? We all need to figure out this kind of thing. So we all need to see what is before us to be cured. And in most the the gender incongruence is not often the pathology. Sometimes it's the parents' ideas around that, and sometimes it's just the reaction to that. I've treated a lot of trans people, and I've never actually had any of them kind of detransition. Usually, what happens at treating and like adults and everything, I've started treating a couple of trans kids now, and that's an interesting story. They're all super fun. I love them, but I've never had anyone detransition. But what happens is like, oh, Paul, I feel better now. Like I don't wake up crying because my parents abandoned me anymore. I don't I don't fear like I'm going to be killed anymore. Maybe I will be. I don't know. It's a violent place out there, but it's not like I'm not terrified of it anymore. I don't have nightmares about these things anymore. I'm healthy and I can sleep again, and those kind of things
And they
typically
lose
happen.
their shame because there's a
They
lot
lose,
of shame often.
they lose the shame a great deal. So, but yeah, no. So, and then, we deal with whatever comes up. Your job as a doctor is to help people into the greatest state of health and to help them along their evolutionary journey as a human being. You know, Humans are not static. We don't just like pop into existence. We go through a developmental process, and stuff kind of comes at us and cuts off that developmental process. Your job as a doctor is to do that. Now,
Exactly. And as a parent, to
yeah,
simply accept you and love your children unconditionally and take it one day at a time. Well, you mentioned earlier before I started recording about how this is not a modern day thing that has popped up. This multiple gender. Uh, this has been part of humans for a really long time,
yeah,
probably since the beginning.
I think so too. Linguistically, as far as I'm aware, we've got evidence for it for at least 8,000 years.
Right,
So, yeah,
right. And for those of you who, follow uh, science, archaeology, and things like that, and you want to say, well, what about 125,000 years ago? What about that? Well, if at 8,000 years you have something that's clear and evident, where do you think it came from? It didn't just pop up, right?
yeah.
In
Well,
language and in beliefs.
yeah, I'm probably if it's we've got linguistic evidence for about 8,000 years, like it probably goes all the way back. Like I'm willing to give it that. So, so I'm just putting it out there that this is one of the innate expressions of healthy human life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If it is allowed to thrive in a particular cultural environment.
One of the things that concerns me is that how a fad can overtake the human population. So I think on some level, in some places of the world, there's some fadness to this, right? To kids, right? And then
Yeah,
to the parents who are in support groups and helping one another and talking and how social media works. Like we understand that now, even though people won't accept that social media can, based on what you're liking and who you're following and what you pause and read, it completely sculpts your experience of what makes up the world today, which is completely not true, right? It's very scary. I
yeah,
mean, capitalists are
yeah.
using it to make a fortune, but it's a very
The
scary
algorithm,
the algorithm.
yeah, yeah, the algorithm does not show you reality. It shows you a place designed to either get you outraged and super engaged or to make money off for somebody else. So the algorithm does not show you reality in any way.
Right. So that's my concern as a practitioner is that there's this fad thing happening where it's really popular for kids. And okay, so let's say puberty's come and now you've got kids in high school. Just because hormones have kicked in doesn't mean that sets all the boats straight, right? That there's still, what peer group are they part of? What?
What a great pun. Sets all the boats straight.
I didn't do it on purpose. I have those moments.
Pun,
What,
Eli, intend that pun. That is a good pun. So,
so what kids are they hanging out with? What grown-ups are they hanging out with? What church do they go to? What's the home environment like? Well, how are they being raised and are they trying to gain the approval of their parents? Uh, so I think in my head, fad, right? Fad
yeah,
being it's not actually what's going on inside of them. It's this peer pressure and adult pressure around them to behave in a certain way, to speak in a certain way, to pretend to be something that they may or may not be. And this is concerning to me as a physician.
So I've got some thoughts on this. I've got one specific example. So
Okay.
a mutual colleague of ours, I won't name her just to protect the individual's privacy, but a mutual colleague has a daughter that's in university right now. And this university, they got homerooms, got like 100 people. So about half the class is kind of cisgender. They were born woman, they continue to be a woman and everything. About half the class is like gender queer or non-gendered or something like that. And there's actually one trans person.
Okay.
So there's one trans person that checks out. That's about right. The half the class is genderqueer right now. Oh,
Yeah.
huh. So there is particularly the way we're doing and I will say this right now, I am a great supporter of DEI. I'm there's my political stance. I think it's a good the principle is actually quite good. And like the Canadian version of it is education on what happened with the residential schools and the Indigenous genocide in Canada, and particularly in healthcare, the impacts that has on healthcare, and the teaching of the 96 recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's really good. Like that's good stuff in there. Teaching people about inherent bias and being conscious of it and everything. Those are good programs. But the way DEI is structured and the education is structured kind of in the modern context, particularly in the United States, it's almost like an underprivileged thing. Like when people get, if you're outside of one of the underprivileged groups, there's kind of, what's the word? The way it's being taught now, it encourages people to find ways that they can be unprivileged to kind of gain that little bit of status in that way. We have a phenomenon in Canada right now called pretendians. So people of European descent that fake Indigenous status to get like things, and it's really bad in academia to get to get like honors for Indigenous people or positions or funding or anything else like that. And that's it. The most key thing being Buffy St. Marie. She was a pretendian, so she yeah. So that's kind of there's a thing like that. So I'm not going to say that all of these people being genderqueer are like that, but there is an element to that and everything. So the vast majority of which they're not doing hormonal therapies, they're not doing anything, they're not socially transitioning, but they're just kind of doing that. And okay, that's fine, that's great. But there is an element of that to that. But you know how you can address that if you're a parent raising the kids and you're worried about social contagion in this way? You can
Uh,
talk to your kids.
see?
You can talk to your kids. You can say, like, honey, these things happen. Like, you can help your kids be secure in who they are.
Right.
I will tell you one thing, there is great homeopathic support that we can offer for that.
Mm.
So, homeopathic medicine is fantastic for helping kids build up their own identity. So, there's three remedies I specifically wanted to talk about in that way. Um, one of which, and this is one that's really important to women in particular, is a remedy called folliculinum.
Oh yeah.
So folliculinum is homeopathic estrogen. So I often remember, like, many girls are going through like their pre-puberty. They're like, I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to make the world a better place. I'm going to be, do all this stuff. And then puberty hits and they're like, oh, look at that boy. Oh, look at that boy. Oh, I will be whatever he wants me to be. That's a real thing.
Yes.
That is the folliculinum picture. And folliculinum's got an interesting polarity because they will either fight, if they're in a really intense state of health, they will fight tooth and nail against that. They will be who nobody wants them to be ever, which is a problem. Or I will be whatever you want me to be. And this is
Yeah.
not to say if you're a parent with no homeopathic training, do not give these remedies to your kids. We are using them as examples of pathological states. Do not give them without training and without supervision from someone that's qualified in homeopathic medicine. So
Thank you
just
for saying that. I was going to say that if you didn't.
do not do that. We
Not
are
like
using
arnica for a bruise, people, right?
what?
It's not
Oh,
like
yeah.
arnica for a bruise.
No, it's not. If you
No.
are doing psychological work, you need training. So, but first aid for homeopathics, wonderful. You can do those unsupervised. That's great. But more advanced stuff, particularly with family members, you need someone else there. Even if you know what you're doing, you need someone else to do this. So that's one remedy, and it's a grand remedy. It's a huge remedy for women's hormonal cycles. It's also great for menopause because like estrogen kind of goes that way until like menopause, and then okay, I've been what everyone else wants me to be, my boss, my kids, my husband. It crashes at menopause. Screw all of you. I hate you. Like
Right. Right.
living a life for everyone else and get really mad.
Right.
So homeopathic estrogen really normalizes all of this, where you can live your life, be responsive to others, but at the same time, live your life for you, know who you are and everything. Fantastic remedy for that kind of thing. The other of which is another remedy is tuberculinum.
Oh,
Tuberculum
yeah.
is an amazing remedy. There's several variations of it. There's Bacillinum, which is human tuberculosis, and Tuberculinum bovinum kenti, which is like cow tuberculosis. But they will either have that same polarity, like tuberculinum, bovinum, it typically comes out as tantrums, like I am doing what I'm going to do, or else just like
Oh yeah. Yeah.
horrendous tantrums. Or alternately, particularly when they hit puberty and when they get a little bit older, they will just subsume themselves. And the predominant one is country and nationalism. They will subsume, or religion,
Mm-hmm.
or idea. They will identify themselves as something beyond that and lose themselves in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's fast remedy for those kind of things. And they typically have like a ton of allergies. They won't mount a fever and everything else like that. And on a separate note, treating your kids vitalistically with homeopathy, hydrotherapy, and fasting during fever will enable their immune response to help, and that will propel this development along. This will really help coalesce their sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
Treating your kids vitalistically when it comes to acute interventions. And again, you this needs some like basic stuff you can handle, but occasionally you will need supervision. So it's important to get like a good homeopath that can take acutes on your team, and to get yourself trained up in things like hydrotherapy, which can handle a lot of acute infections. So
And
that's
chronic. And chronic.
and chronic, yes.
Yeah.
So yes. And the last one that I want to talk about is morbillinum. Morbillinum,
Marbelinum. Really? Marbelinum.
morbillinum is measles. So it's
Measles.
the
Measles.
pathic made out of measles. It I triturated it, so I proved it on myself and kind of explored it. It's like the vital force just won't be impressed with the individual. It's like so blank and impressionable that anyone else can kind of come in there and put their stuff in and everything. A lot of skin stuff, a lot of just like, okay. And it again, these are all in my particular way of doing homeopathy, and I know other people have different ways, and they all kind of work. But so in my particular way, all of these remedies are in the third stage of human development. They are, which has to do with identity, which has to do with socialization, which has to do with just who am I in this.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like morbillinum, it's like the vital force just doesn't get impressed with who the being is. It's
Mm-hmm.
just in the blank state, and they try and they try and they try and they just can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a very good remedy for that kind of blank impressed state. So, and
Interesting.
I know, so there's a lot that homeopathy can do to get your kids secure in their identity. Maybe their identity is as a male in a woman's body. Maybe it is as a woman in a male's body. Maybe it is as a true two-spirited neutral person. Although I would, if you're not indigenous, maybe avoid using the two-spirited thing, because like there's a specific lineage and a specific thing that needs to
Right.
do that. There's
Right.
there's a equivalent to that. So so they will, and they will be, maybe they'll go along. Maybe they're like, oh, my friends are genderqueer. I'm going to do that for a little while. Maybe it'll stick around. Maybe, yeah, I really am. Or maybe they're not. Maybe it's like, oh, did that for a little while. That's fun. So you can talk to your kids about that, and you can talk and do that. And I always encourage communication with that. It's, yeah. So talk to your kids. Their identity it's one of my homeopathy teachers used to use this metaphor. You're not sculpting something out of a blank piece of rock. You are planting a tree and helping it grow. The tree is going to be a peach tree, or it's going to be an apple tree, or it's going to be an orange tree according to its inclination. But you can provide a very early environment so it grows up nice and healthy, and you can water it and make sure it's happy
I
and
love
live a
that
good.
analogy.
Yeah,
Right. I love that analogy. You plant an oak acorn, you're going to get an oak tree. As hard as you try to make it a maple, it will not be a maple. It's going to be an oak. Now it can be a strong, thriving oak, or it can be a weak, puny oak because you're trying to make it into a maple.
yeah.
Like, so
And
do you agree with me about this? Don't do any surgery, definitely before puberty.
I'm going to say that the allopathic guidelines already say that. I am going to, so the way that I discuss this with patients is that, okay, Kid wants to wear girls' clothes. He wants to keep on doing them. Fine. Is he happy? Is he all right? Is everything going well? Great. Problem solved. Hormonal therapy has a place. And this is where things are new. So, there are a lot of hormonal therapy in trans individuals can really, really mentally stabilize them. You give them
Pre-puberty or post-puberty? I'm trying
person.
to make in puberty my line here.
Okay, so we'll get into that,
Okay.
but we'll get into that. But in so most of the time I deal with adults and so forth. If they're socially transitioned, their family's accepting them, they're doing good that way. But there's still some stuff going on. Quite often, hormonal therapy, which I do not prescribe, they go and get that from the gender clinics and so forth. It can actually, in some instances, really mentally stabilize them. So it's like they get the hormonal therapy that they are. Now, Eli, you've dealt with this.
Mhm.
Anyone, hormones are not working, they're going to be a little weird.
Yes,
They're going to have some mental health problems and everything.
yes, yes, yes.
What difference between why is it that we see like a person that needs an adrenal glandular, that their cortisol is out of balance? Why is it that we see a woman who's got too much progesterone and not enough estrogen, or too much estrogen? Or why do we see a man with low T as different than a trans person that needs hormonal supplementation?
Well, it's a good question. It's a good question as long as the basics have been addressed and
Yes, and
health has been restored and
yeah,
you still have that.
I will tell you a lot of the time, if there's a trans person and their hormones are out of balance, doing some vitalistic work gets their own body making the hormones. Your body can usually, usually do that. So we do our own version of hormonal therapies, but our hormonal therapies are to get the body endogenously producing its own.
Right,
And when you do that, I'm like, oh, okay, you don't need this anymore. Hooray.
right,
So there are aesthetics that can be involved as well, because we have this gender binary in our culture. We don't accept people as, being a man in a woman's body or a woman in a man's body. So there's a lot of times when hormonal therapies are done for aesthetic purposes. Those have a higher rate of difficulties. And, if you're a practitioner, you need to monitor that. If
right,
someone tries hormonal therapy and then they get mentally worse, like, okay, that is not working.
right.
You need to, and there are other cosmetic procedures that you can do instead of that to get the aesthetic. So but yeah, so I'm not hormonal therapy can be very helpful for many individuals if you can get, but if they get worse afterwards, if their mental health deteriorates, you need to
The
work.
wrong path. It's the wrong
Yeah,
path.
it's not the one for them. And in most individuals, you can actually get the endogenous hormone production to where it needs to be.
Mhm.
Most, not all. And this
Right, I
if
agree.
and hormonal therapy is a valuable addition to like medicine in general. So if the person needs it, fantastic, wonderful. That's good. But that's been my experience. So and then occasionally in some individuals, like, okay, hormonal therapies, but I want surgery. Go for it, man. So they've really had time to sit and think about it, and they've done that, and they need surgical correction. Well, that's what surgery's for. I do maintain surgery as part of vitalistic medicine. Now, none of us can do it because of our legal oppression, but it's there for a good reason. Some people want that surgical transition, and they would want that surgical transition even if they're accepted as a man in woman's body or woman in a man's body or true gender. And there we go. That's what it's for. So
Mhm, mhm.
there's a clear step of progressions there. You don't just leap instantly to surgery in an 8-year-old that wants to wear a dress and
No,
everything for.
no, 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 no. Okay, come
Oh,
back to the puberty line.
yeah.
So you said you were going to come back to the line, to the puberty
Yes.
line.
Yes. So that is kind of where things go. Again, there's a lot of gender essentialism. So a lot of people don't want to, a lot of individuals, particularly parents and some medical professionals, really do fear for kids if they are visibly trans. And that's a fair fear. There's a lot of violence out there.
Mhm.
Uh, There are towns where people are placed in bounties for using the wrong bathroom and everything. It's it's a dark place right now for trans people.
Mhm.
And the need to want to stop a puberty process that might make someone visibly that way. But the solution is to build social trust The solution is to improve society for that particular problem. Um, it's not to make it's yeah, the solution is to build trust. It's like the solution to racism or anti-indigenous racism or homophobia is not to make the person act straight or to dye someone's skin white or to try to pass as a non-indigenous person and be quiet about your heritage. The cure there is to improve society.
Right. Let people learn how to accept.
Yeah,
Okay, we're coming up on an hour.
yeah.
Before I do my summary, is there anything we haven't talked about that you think is really important for and the point of today were the parents, right, of young children who are like, what do I do? How do I do this? Should I be worried? Yeah, and I think you've given them some good things. We'll summarize at the end. But is there something that you haven't had a chance to say that you think is important to say?
No, I think we've covered. I would add, like, yeah, no, particularly when we get to that, that tree metaphor. Your kids are your kids are not your kids are your kids are a tree. You're growing them, you're making sure that they grow up big, strong, and healthy, and they've got lots of access to sunlight and water. And that's they're going to be what they're going to be. You can try to force them otherwise, but usually that does cause a great deal of damage. And I grew up gay in the 2000s. There's a lot of my friends that did that. One of the biggest issues is suicide, and I lost a lot of friends to suicide when I was a club kid and
I lost
everything.
some friends too, as well. So this is the take homes for me that I'm going to pass on to y'all. Talk to your children. Be transparent. Be confident. Speak from a place of wanting them to be the best version of themselves that they can be, and not from a place of fear. Right? You don't want to force your child to be something that they're not, but you also want to be there to guide them should they have questions, and know that it's perfectly natural for them to gender explore up to a certain point. Well, it's always natural, right? I don't want to say that up to a certain age it's okay, but up to a certain age, I'd be more concerned if they weren't exploring and imagining, right? I mean, they're checking out the world around them. They're trying on different shirts and they're trying on different ways of being. They're trying to figure out who they are this life this time around. Unless they're just a really old soul and they were born knowing exactly, and then you're not going to even have these, right? They won't care what you say. They know exactly who they are and what they want to do. Um, Especially consider this transition that puberty brings with the flooding in of hormones. The hormones are there, but at the time of puberty, they're coming into the beginning of adulthood and their ability to reproduce and take their places in society and in culture, right? There's a reason why estrogen has a certain effect on the body and a reason why testosterone has an effect it has on the body, and the things that it makes a human want to do or have an inclination to do and to explore. Talk to them, talk to your practitioner. I hope all of you by now have considered getting a naturopathic doctor with a specialty in homeopathy on board, classical homeopathy, and talk to them about folliculinum and tuberculinum and morbillinum. Well, I'll just use the old morbillinum. So as these can be three powerful remedies that maybe we forget about or we don't consider in the differential of remedies that are being prescribed. What else? What other summary points did I miss?
And I would add one more thing. So in research, if there's a kid that's truly trans, and even if they're in a hostile cultural environment, even if things outside of their immediate control are difficult, having the presence of a supportive family, or even something like a teacher that unconditionally supports them and accepts them in their journey, can normalize the suicide rate.
Yes.
Your kids are wonderfully resilient, and if they are treated with love and acceptance and acceptance and all that and a touch of knowledge, like they are going to be okay.
They're going to
So
be
you
okay. They need that
and
one person, though, that unconditionally accepts them and is honest with them, and that they don't have to hide and be incongruent. They need to be able to be congruent, right? Um, there were a couple of other things that we mentioned. Watch for the fad phenomenon. That who's your children? Who are your children hanging around with? What do they believe? Uh, don't trust everything that you watch on social media because it's not the real world. Work with someone who's put the time in, done the research, and can truly guide you with your child and their psychological and physiological development. Yeah, I think this has been really, really. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us about this, Dr. Paul. I mean, you're right. Society needs to really think about how we could do things better.
yeah,
And
it's a centuries long process, but we're going through it and we're doing it right now. So now is the time of the great reconciliation, at least in Canada. We're trying to reconcile with the crap that's happened here and the things that have happened particularly, but not exclusively with Indigenous people. And part of the great reconciliation is dealing with like, oh, sexual identity and gender diversity and all of this kind of thing. Ooh, that's been a problem too.
well, apparently, we're not doing this in the U.S. since now there's officially only two sexes, male and female, and apparently we had the name of the Gulf of Mexico the wrong name, and we're going to solve all the problems of Gaza by putting in things that their religion strictly prohibits, both sides of the strip. And like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but there's just some things that make absolutely no sense to me at all, at all, not even a little bit. But this isn't a political call today.
No, it's not.
I know that there's issues that some of you wrote in to ask me about. Um, but this wasn't really just a free for all on the whole topic of gender identity or sexual orientation. This was really addressing these parents and caregivers who are concerned about what their young children are doing or even their young teens, and what should be done and when should it be done and how these individuals can be best supported. The other topics, I'm not going to get into those. I'm not going to argue about who should have kids and who shouldn't have kids and can males actually biologically carry a child. And I know that you all wrote in with questions like that, but that was not the purpose of today's episode. Maybe someday we'll get into stuff like that. Maybe we'll see. But
More than willing to be having another talk with you about such things, Eli.
well, I
So,
always love chatting with you. I hope you have a great day, everyone. Have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next week where we'll pick back up with some more vitalism on vital wisdom.